Thayer Thomas reverses field, cuts it up. Thomas gets a block. He's got a chance. Thayer Thomas makes a house call.
All right, folks, we're back with another edition of the Red and White Podcast. I'm your host, Evan, and I'm really leaning into that Thayer Thomas clip because we really need some more highlights that I can use as an intro. So I apologize if that is getting repetitive for folks, but yeah, that's the kind of season it's been so far. But I'm here as always with my co-host, Will, back from the dregs of the Puerto Rican bathroom. Will, welcome back.
I'm loud and clear, and I'm ready to be here.
Yeah, you are loud and clear. Let me turn down my audio. So we had an interesting podcast last week with James, or this week, with James from IPS, and we have got a bunch of questions. So I want to get into a little bit of rehashing what we talked about there and, answer some of the questions that folks brought up. I think the biggest thing is, and I think James hears this a lot, that he doesn't want to be critical for coaching right now. The whole protect your sources thing. And he talked about it, to be honest. And there's been a lot of conversation about execution versus coaching and which one should we be most critical of. And to me, I'm not entirely sure. But I thought one of our listeners, David Danford, had a great tweet to me that I wanted to read out here. And he says, big question is, when the scheme is done well, do we win? I would generally say yes with DD's scheme, which is take a lead and hold it. But it's very hard to use if you're not more talented. That's when execution becomes so important. But with youth, that's really tough. Now, I thought that was a really good kind of summation of it. To me, it's overall a fair question. These guys get paid to coach. They get paid to coach their players into positions to be successful. They get paid to recruit the right players. If they're not executing, some of that blame has to go to the coaches. It just feels like it's probably an equal part to both, right? I think if execution was perfect, do you win? Yeah, probably more often than not. But, when you're young and you're not able to execute like that, and it has to be seen in practice, I'm sure of it, then they should probably, in my opinion, be simplifying things or doing something different, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I am a little bit more on with James' side of this, where it really comes down to execution, because we've seen so many times this year in particular where the right play is drawn up and then it just doesn't get executed, especially around like screen passes and things like that, fourth downs in the red zone, things like that. But at the same time, the scheme matters. The way you draw up a play matters, because if you draw up a good scheme and you execute it, then your basic Jimmy and Joe is going to have the advantage to make the play. And then it comes down to, do you recruit better players so that when they are put in that position, they not only make the good play, but they make the back-breaking kind of play, like at wide receiver, running back, things like that. Same thing on defense with getting the right kind of linebackers, defensive ends, and things like that. Even look at it last week with one of those big plays. It might have been one of the Bailey runs. Everyone's filling the gaps, right? And then a guy just doesn't ramp up the tackle, and then he's 50 yards down the field. That's where the coaches made the right play, and then the players just didn't execute it. The counterpoint to that is, if you get better players, they tend to be able to cover up mistakes. And one of the things that was discussed on a podcast about the Wake Forest game was that when they lost their linebacker, whose name I'm going to struggle to say, I think it's Sternard. The Wake Forest beat reporter was saying that he covers up a lot of execution mistakes by being a smart player that knows where to be, can tell other guys what to do. So I think you can't really do one without the other, but I don't know. I think so many problems this year were execution. You watch like the offensive line play when guys don't make the two critical blocks against Syracuse. A Jordan Houston run, I think, was stuffed instead of probably being 60 yards into the end zone. And I think that's what's interesting about our scheme, is it really is down and maybe this is just schemes in general. Maybe I just don't focus on other teams as much. But it seems like one failure just completely destroys the play, if that makes any sense. There's no margin for error in the scheme, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's – I don't know where the balance is. I thought James made a really good point when he – his example of, when you win, you praise the players. When you lose, you hate the coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And, I never really thought about it. It's 100% true. And I think there's probably a bit of balance in both, right? When you win, the coaches made a good plan and the guys executed. When you lose, did the coaches make the best plan and the guys didn't execute? So, right, it's both of them. I just don't know where I stand on who gets the most blame, if that's, makes sense. I want to take this clip, though, from the IPS podcast that they had this week. So I'm going to play this. It's about 2.5 minutes long. Just listen to it. Let me know what you think.
Defense every game. Just try to focus my eyes on what we're doing on that side of the ball. And here's just what I found a little bit. I had some questions about it, to be honest with you. Boston College did what we expected them to do, right? So they are a downhill running team. And we knew this going in, right? So we say we're going to be in a 3-3-5, right? That's our base defense. And so we've got 5 defensive backs on the field pretty much at all times. We rarely get out of it. And Boston College has a backup quarterback, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to lean on their big running backs mostly. You can kind of sense that's probably going to be the game plan. How many teams are going to put the game on your walk-on backup quarterback? That you don't see that. But I guess what I found interesting is that Boston College did, for the most part, what we thought they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they came out in 12 personnel and 13 personnel. And so for those not familiar with it, that's 1 running back. And if it's 12 personnel, they've got 2 tight ends. And if it's 13 personnel, they've got 1 running back and 3 tight ends. Well, as I go back and watch it, I see, okay, well, they're in 12 personnel. And there were times they were in 13 personnel, but I look on the other side of the ball and I see State is in their 3-3-5. And in my head, I actually went back to Boston College's depth chart. And because there were a couple of plays in 13 personnel where I'm looking at this saying, okay, Boston College's tight ends all weigh between 250 and 260 pounds.
Right.
They have 1 wide receiver in the game. They have 2 running backs who are well over 220. And yet we're trying to set the edge with a nickel like Baker Williams. There were times, he got pushed back because guess what? He's got a guy 60 pounds heavier than him blocking him. And I just kind of scratch my head a little bit and say, what did we expect here? They're in 13 personnel. They've got big guys on the field. And we're playing 5 defensive backs. They've only got 1 wide receiver on the field on some of these plays. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of scratched my head a little bit like, what did we think was going to happen in this scenario, right? Short yardage, is that really the best way to kind of play that? So this is personnel matching, right? You see they come in with, three tight ends. Do we match up more?
So I think you made an interesting point there. And that, to me, is where the coaching comes in, right? It's, what Boston College is going to do. They're going to line up every big horse they have and try to run behind them. And do you adjust by not, and you don't adjust by having, you have a 3-3-5 out there, which is the defense we've switched to stop the spread teams. And, that's just, I don't know if that works against a team when you're lining up, like Philip said, you're lining up tight ends that are 60 pounds bigger than our edge guys.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We obviously have limited defensive linemen, right? And the more I've been thinking about this all morning about his comment was maybe you could have done something kind of outside the box where you do like the 3 down linemen we've been doing, but then you do 5 linebackers or something like that, right? You just bring in the bulk, so that you don't have these 260-pound guys going up against 200-pound corners, right? That you even it back out with 230, 240, type guys. You get Drake, Asus, Peyton, Moore. Maybe he plays better if there's some other tacklers out there, right? But That was really interesting to me because I was thinking about it all morning. Like you could put a DB on the one wide receiver and then shade coverage over the top with a safety, and that gives you the other guy to sit there and watch the line. I just I did wonder if we kind of made a mistake there. I know we can't go to a 4 down lineman because we just don't have enough line. We just don't have the guys, right? You can't put the like a Xavier Elias in there. He's just as bad as a DB matchup kind of at that point because he's going to get mauled by the bigger linemen. I think it's a really good point. It's a good question. And I don't know if it's just one of those things where they said, look, we don't want to put in a brand new defense just for one game and, get our guys thinking about too much. I mean, if you go back and look at it, Philip did a good point about, they passed more in those earlier drives than we expected. But at the same time, I mean, the defense did everything it needed to for like the first 5 drives of that game. It's just that eventually you just get worn out. And if you're not going shot for shot with a team like BC, then you're just in for a long day. But it would have been real interesting to see if when they brought in that super heavy scheme, if we had countered it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to crush the coaches on that. But at the same time, it's kind of like, why didn't we do something different there?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And that's what most fans point to, in my opinion. When you look at, they say something like Dave Dorn's too stubborn or they don't adjust. I mean, it's things exactly like that. Like, BC can't throw the ball. It's a walk-on quarterback. And they're going to run it behind it with these 2 horses with, a strong offensive line. I mean, maybe you're not adjusting to a 4-3, but maybe a 3-4, right? Bring an extra linebacker in or something, I don't know, and I'm not the football savant that would need to figure that question out. But just to me, that's where they open themselves up to criticism from people. And yeah. I think it's a valid criticism.
I mean, the one thing we do well is we stop the run. Like we've done that each year, and that makes sense most of the time when you're not playing a team that basically has a goal line formation on practically every snap.
Right. Yeah, you're stopping the run against spread teams.
Yeah, and you'd think that they would be going, okay, hey, strength for strength. How do we get guys out there? Now it could be, I don't know, maybe they just didn't feel like they had enough guys there to pull that off. Or maybe they just hadn't thought about it at all. Right? I mean, Philip also makes like a great point later in that podcast about when our linebackers were sitting up back off the line, it allowed their O-line to basically double team and watch. And when our guys were coming in, then they would pick up the blocks, then there'd be the hole, and then the running back would go through. And instead, if we had lined up on the line with them, then you have to get a one-on-one block right away. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. The other thing, though, is no one else on the schedule is going to play that style. Right. You know what I mean? Like Wake's not going to do that. If they do it, then they must think it's a tendency coming out of the bye week. That's the only reason I think that it would ever matter until next year against BC at home.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true, but, just still seems like just an area where they could have done something different and maybe it avoided that train wreck. And maybe it's just bad execution. I don't know, but yeah, I just think it's something interesting to talk about. And I heard Philip talking about it. I'm like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, man. Like, why are you still doing this? And that's what everybody else was tweeting at us, was like, why are you still doing this?
That game is so different, though. If you go back and look at it, if State just scores after that pick 6 when they're down on the 1 yard line, right? Like, if they just execute right there, you got Thayer Thomas wide open, and Hawkinson airmails it. And
you wouldn't do too much DFS.
I know. I was about to say, as soon as I said it, I was like, "Oh, sorry, guys. That's a game I was thinking about for this weekend, not last weekend." But that game then is, I think 10-7 at that point, and your defense has some hope again. And then even later, right? Leary's on the 4 or 5 yard line, and we can't convert. Oh my gosh, I just feel like that's still like execution. Most of those runs that they beat us down on were just execution plays, right? Guys kind of loafing, arm tackle. You can't arm tackle a guy that's 250 pounds.
Right.
It just doesn't work. And I think it also just goes to show that why it's important to have like a James Smith-Williams type there too. That guy really sets the edge on the run. I think he's better on the run than necessarily in the pass, right? And I just think you had a lot of younger guys playing and just no leadership out there. And I'm not saying that to call out anybody. It's like when you have 8 freshmen out there, I'm not expecting leadership,
right?
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But let's keep moving.
Well, yeah. Doug also asked us. He said good stuff. A few comments. Why do we focus solely on stopping the run? Is there a scheme that top 5 teams use on defense? What do you think?
I think we stop the run because it's the easiest thing to do, and it's the most debilitating for a team if they can't run. Even when you're playing like an option team, it's not extremely difficult to defend. You just have to be disciplined. And I think with the spread teams, especially if they're kind of like a pass efficiency team that's trying to kind of knife you 1,000 times instead of hit you with a baseball bat on one play, then taking away the run and forcing them to do that over and over and over is going to eventually lead to them either making a mistake with a turnover or they're just going to drop the passes. So I'm totally fine with it. If we were that good at defending the run every single game and we didn't let a game like BC happen, I'd have no problem with it. I think that's the scheme you want to be.
Yeah, I agree. I think that goes in part with Dave Doran's ball control. And I think a lot of teams will do that. Even, if you look at Alabama or you look at Clemson, when they're really dominating teams, it's because they're running the ball. Right? They can throw it deep. They can make the big plays. But ETN and every back that Alabama's ever had, right, they've been important because when they get a lead or when they get up on you, it's hard to get back because you can't stop them grinding it out with those big backs, those really dynamic running backs in that running game. So I think that's the basis for Doran's philosophy. So I get it. I kind of agree because it's frustrating as hell to watch a team run up and down the field on you.
Yeah, especially when you don't really see it that often. I mean, it was almost like, wow, this isn't who we are. I mean, I think their scheme is straightforward. Stop the run, be good at stopping the run so that when they get into the red zone, you take away the run there too. It's a condensed field. And if they're going to try to get efficiency on you, it's going to be a lot harder when it's condensed. So it absolutely makes sense from a philosophy. I just don't think you can really consistently be good at pass defense anymore. There's way too much optionality in these offenses that I can't expect DBs to be better than wide receivers consistently.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the trend across all football, the 300-yard game, which used to be the benchmark, now it's become pretty standard. And if you're not throwing for 400, then that's when you get the attention. Everybody throws for 300 these days. It's just 2 deep balls and a bunch of slants, and you got 300 yards. So it's changed a lot. The dynamic of the game has changed a lot. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just how the trend is going. Right? You're not going to stop anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the passing offense across the country. The top 25 offenses are throwing the ball for 280 or more yards a game. And then even when you go down to like the top 50, people are still throwing the ball for 250 yards per game. I mean, it's just harder. It's the same thing like in the NFL, right? There's a reason running backs, like if they get to 100 yards in a game, it's a miracle, it seems. Because everyone is convinced the way you limit teams is you take away one element of their offense. And the one that you can do that consistently on is typically the run game.
Yeah, and I think it also plays into wanting to get turnovers. You're more likely to get an interception than you are a strip fumble, or something like that.
Unless you're
because
NC
probably, unless you're us for some godforsaken reason we can't get a turnover. But I think that plays in part of it too, is you're taking away the low risk offense and making teams play a little bit higher risk offense. I think that's the scheme, and I imagine that's probably pretty consistent across the top 5 teams, to answer your question there. He also goes on, a lot of couch coaches like myself just want us to see us win and get frustrated. I hope our fans never talk shit to players on Twitter, though. I think they want to win more than us. Yeah, I mean, I think for the majority, the 99%, I think our fans are really good. I think every fan base has the crazy fans, and we've talked about that quite a bit. But yeah, people get frustrated because you think there's the potential there, and then, like you said, that BC game when it's not who you are, it's not the team you normally see, and then something like that happens, and that's where the frustration comes from. So
yeah, and the thing too is, like, it gets worse when everything is going wrong. Like, what did we say going into that game? Well, their defense is trash, so at least we will score, right?
Yeah.
And what you saw was we moved the ball consistently on them, but because we had perhaps the wrong quarterback in the game, we didn't score, and that makes things even worse for the fans, right? Because you're like, we're not getting field goals, we're not getting touchdowns, and we can't tackle these monsters.
Yeah.
That's just a game where, as a fan, you just kind of have to be like, well, it's Saturday, it's nice outside, I'm going to go do something else. Highly recommend that.
Yeah.
Might want to do that next weekend too, fans. You don't have to watch the game. It's not going to impact us unless you're going to Wake Forest.
Yeah, so getting into that, I'm going to have to either watch this game on delay or on the radio. Not looking forward to it. I promise I won't live tweet because I know frustrated folks because they were getting our ass kicked and I'm just catching up and they're reliving it twice. So yeah, that was interesting. I don't know how I'm going to watch this weekend. I might just watch at night when everybody's asleep and cut off society. But State goes to Winston-Salem. Wake Forest riding high. I don't know, what are they, ranked 19th or something in the country? The weirdest offense you'll see to date.
They're number one in our hearts, though.
Oh God! So every week, y'all things you don't see. Will comes on and puts his name into our little recording setup, and it changes every week. And this week it goes to Wake Forest pass, and I had a chuckle, so I thought I'd let him give you the rundown of Wake Forest and what to expect at Winston-Salem.
Yeah, so I was going kind of stat diving this morning to prepare because I wasn't going to have time to watch many of their games. And here's the first thing you need to know. This is a disciplined Wake Forest team. They're third in penalties allowed each game, which is fantastic. That's exactly what State wants to be. And, of course, I was lazy and I did not look up what State's numbers were there. But I'm sure we're not that great because we probably had all those penalties early in the year with the offensive line, which has been a little bit better, to be honest. So third in penalties allowed. Their third down conversion defense is ranked 16th in the country. So that's something we've struggled with in the past. I could see that kind of being a haunting factor for us. But they're also 61st in scoring defense and 63rd in the red zone defense. So if we do get down into the red zone area, this is not a team that we need to necessarily be frightened of, especially if Devin Leary can keep up his passing down there, which just added a new dimension. And like we had said, even like with Syracuse in those games where, we got down in the red zone and then we became one-dimensional because we couldn't really do anything. So everyone had to key off. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch once we get in the red zone this week. Vice versa on their offense, their 8th and third down conversion. A part of that is just that tempo and just uniqueness of the hold it forever mesh point that they run. They're 7th in passing offense, so do not be throwing a beer at the screen when they're passing on top of us. You should expect them to try to pass it on us the whole time and then see if we can bow up in the red zone, because the red zone offense that they have is 48th in the country. And that's important to know because if Jamie Newman does not play this game, his power run is a big factor in their red zone game. They basically run him in power, in the red zone, or they try to get isolated looks at Sage Surratt. And that's another thing I would say is like we should be watching throughout this game is when you see Sage kind of one-on-one at the top of the screen, it's almost always going to him, and he's almost always going to do a sluggo kind of route. So he'll run in, he'll do a double move, and he'll keep going. So when I was watching the FSU game, that's something I keyed on right away. And then the only other thing I would think of that would be relevant to us is they're 18th in sacks allowed. And for reference, BC was third. So, I think this game is going to come down to can State, screw up their line of scrimmage, with our nose tackles and ruin that mesh point game. And can we get to Newman or Hartman? Because if we can get sacks, this defense is completely different. If we can't get back there and they can have all day to throw, you're going to see a lot of double move Sage Surratt, and to kick it in the nuts, Kendall Hinton, who was supposed to be a quarterback of ours, is now a slot receiver and pretty good for Wake Forest. And
so one of the questions I put in the document for you is how do all these numbers align with their strength of schedule so far?
What a great question. I could only find one strength of schedule website that I didn't have time to dig through Sagarin. So right now it says they're 78th per the site called teamrankings.com in strength of schedule. And I went back and looked at the FPI on ESPN for each of the games they played. Basically, FSU was the toughest opponent they've had to date at 35 in the FPI. UNC was 44th, and then everyone else was 55th or worse. So a lot of people have said, hey, that 6-1 that they have is a product of their schedule. And I think that's really, really fair. When you look at them from an SP plus standpoint, we got to always give a shout out to Bill Connolly on here. They're pretty average. They're 49th in overall SP plus. Their offense is 40th. Their defense is 69th, and their special teams are 43rd. This is not the recipe for a top 25 team. Unless they have a workable schedule. And that's what they've got. And we are not a good team per FPI, which is fair because we are not. But what we look like from an SP comparison is we look a lot like Utah State. I'm not going to read the numbers to save us time, but we're practically identical in SP plus stats. And then FSU is also pretty similar. So I think Wake is basically FSU, if you want to think about it like that. And it's just going to come down to, does your defense not get abused by letting them throw the ball and then score easy outside the red zone scores? I think that's how I feel about it.
So I think that's interesting. You mentioned a couple things. Newman, first of all, he's obviously the key to that. From what folks said, he was warming up last week for their last game. So there's no reason to expect that he doesn't play this week.
That's interesting. So, shout out to IPS. Listen to their podcast with the Wake Forest beat writer. He said basically he comes out and does 2 of their warm-ups. But if he's not out there for this final warm-up drill that they do with the wide receivers, like he was last week, then it doesn't matter. He was out there for, I guess, 2/3 of their warm-up. And then when it came to the final warm-up, he came out in street clothes. So, yeah. So he may not really be close. I think it's going to be a matter of so it sounds like it's a shoulder injury, and it's just going to be one of those kind of game time decisions, I think. I don't think they're going to rush him back if they don't need to, because obviously he is critical to their success. Right. And this is a game on paper that Wake should be able to win. This year's Wake Forest, maybe not last year's. So I don't know. Yeah, it's tough, right? Because we don't have the injury reports anymore. And if I'm a coach, why on earth would I give away any information? I was shocked that Dave Doran said that James Smith-Williams was going to play. Yeah.
So the takeaway from that is if you're going to the game in Winston-Salem, watch the warm-ups and please let us know who's out there for that third drill, because I would love to know beforehand.
Yeah. Because frankly, I won't tune in. No.
The other thing you mentioned was sacks allowed, right? So they're really low in sacks allowed. It's not that they have a dominant offensive line like BC. Is that every single play is a damn RPO where they hold the ball forever. And so, like you said, you've got to disrupt right up the middle, and you've got to make some plays. You can't sit back and hope to keep contained because that puts too much pressure on your backers and the guys behind you. So our nose and our defensive tackles need to just crush the guards in the center in order to contain this. I think that's something that we have probably a bit of advantage in if those guys really play up to their capacity. But that's what I want to see. You want to see that disruption in there when they're running that long mesh point. I think that's super interesting.
I wonder if this is a game where you see a lot more Josh Harris earlier, and his job essentially just be go in and try to wreck the center guard gaps. You know, or maybe we see something where you've got Josh Murchison and James Smith-Williams in there. Because I think that's what you want to do, right? I mean, Sam Hartman does not look like a great passer, and apparently he gets happy feet, even if it's not really like a collapsed pocket. So if you could have Josh just literally blowing up that exchange, because they love to hold that, they get that. It's not just that they hold it for so long. Sometimes they're so close to the line of scrimmage. Like it's so hard to tell what they're going to do. And if you just push that center back into him, I think you could really impact them. And they've had a lot of fumbles this year too, from the games that I watched. Cade Carney is a guy that I'd be watching. If he's having a good game, I think it could be a long night for State. But if he's having, ball control issues, that's usually a sign that Wake's going to go down.
Yeah, it's interesting. You also mentioned the SP Plus, and for ours could be a bit skewed offensively. We're 90th, which is no surprise because our offense is terrible. But what? And we've mentioned this the last podcast. After watching the last 3 quarters of BC, we all have a glimmer of hope that there is some offensive life. So if they perform better than 90th in the SP Plus offensively, I think that bodes well for us. And I think we have a chance to do that. I think that's something that, I think is an interesting kind of storyline here. Yeah,
it would be great if we had data on just when Devin Leary was in a game.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, here's the thing, right? Devin is gonna, and maybe we've got it further in the notes. Do we have anything about when his interceptions are gonna happen and how people react?
We don't, but this is something we just talked about before we hit the record button. Like I'm curious to see what the fan reaction is going to be, because especially in a game like this where we all respect Dave Clawson as a coach. I think he's a really smart coach. And do you think that they're going to scheme something up for a first starting quarterback, right? This is Devin Leary's first start. Yeah. They're going to show him a different look. And what is going to happen when Leary throws that first pick? I want to see him rebound with the confidence. I don't think confidence is ever going to be his concern. But how's the fan reaction going to be? I think that's going to be super interesting too.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to do a lot of things where they show a look, and then once they snap it, they change quickly. Like maybe you'll see like 5 guys down the line looking to blitz, and then 1, 2, 3 will drop back, and vice versa. I think they're going to come hard at him in our line because we've reshuffled again. I see Bryson Spees is now listed as a starter at right tackle. McGirt is now going to back up our boy Icky at left tackle. So I could see them really trying to challenge that line. I think this is kind of like it's going to really come down to the offensive coordinators giving Devin, as much pre-snap information as they can get. So I'm hoping that we kind of run up and do some formation shifts to really make sure what defensive scheme they're going to be in, if they're in man or zone or whatever. I feel like, what do you think? I mean, 1.5. Do you think we're going to have over under 1.5 interceptions?
I'll go with under.
Okay.
I don't think he'll throw 2. I think he's going to throw one, just forcing something. And, we don't always count the end of half Hail Marys, but I expect him to probably want to chuck one up, just knowing his arm strength and how he leans into it. But, during the regular gameplay, I'd expect at least an interception.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here's the thing. Here's what we know is that preseason Leary struggled in camp. There's been some unofficial information on certain message boards that's come out about it. And it makes sense for why he was third string. Now, at the same time, he's also improved upon that. And there's a reason they're handing him the keys. If they didn't trust Devin Leary, they would have just gone to McKay, I think. And people would die if that happened. But I think that just shows you that they really do trust Leary. And they're just probably going to let him run through it for the rest of the year. So
right.
I don't know. He's like a chunk play guy. And I think it's going to be kind of exciting because I don't think Wake Forest is that good of a defense. And what we were talking about earlier, right? I feel like at Syracuse, the OCs actually did scheme up some great one-on-one shots that Hockman actually underthrew most of them. And I wonder if we're just going to kind of go in and say, fuck it. Let's chuck it up and just see if we can score. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the typical approach teams have taken against Wake Forest. And, the two things you said earlier about, well, they played Josh Harris in the middle and then now that right there, that kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier. Are the coaches going to scheme something differently? Right? I think that is really interesting to look at. I mean, because both of those are things that are a bit abnormal that, may play to our advantage, or are they going to stick to what they do? I think that's, if they do, I think people are going to be super frustrated because there's some opportunities presented in this game that, we should take advantage of.
Here's something interesting. Clausen's like 0-7 or 0-8 coming out of the bye week.
Yeah.
So
weird.
Would it be
That's
the most
super weird
NC
stat.
State thing to let him get the first win?
Well, so here's my take on the game overall. And I wrote this down and I've been thinking about it all week. Despite being hopeful that there'd be some offensive performance after, watching the end of the BC game, I'm not going to be hopeful for this game. And it has nothing to do with whether I think we can win or not, because I've made my thoughts on Wake Forest clear. I think they're well coached, but they're not unbeatable. But I think if we all go into this game not expecting to win, which is weird because we usually think Wake Forest, so we should go in to win, at least until recent history. But that's just the general mentality of playing Wake Forest is you think, hey, it's Wake Forest, you go and kick their ass every time. That's not the case. So I'm not going to be hopeful, but I'm a little bit hopeful. It's a very weird feeling to try to force yourself to not be optimistic about a game, right? Because I think it's something that we do as fans is like, yeah, there's a chance here. We can go in and win. And I think there's a little bit of chance, but I'm going to try something different this week. I'm going to expect the worst. Yeah. And I'm going to expect the Wake Forest wide receivers to do what they've been doing all year. They've been playing really well. It's a really strong wide receiver group. And our DBs haven't seen, outside of Scary Terry from FSU, they haven't seen really that level of wide receiver. And I think they've been good. I think they're better athletes than we've had in the past, but they are young. Without McLeod, they are, you're starting, I think, 2 true freshmen or a redshirt freshman. And I think that's how I'm going to try to approach this game is I'm going to be cautious in any optimism here just because I think Wake Forest is an older team, and they're well coached. And I just want a different approach here. I want to come in expecting us to get abused on the outsides and see how that fares. I mean, that's a weird place to be, but that's where I'm trying to approach this game.
Yeah.
Does that make
the problem is the guys who saw Scary Terry are now on IR. So
right.
Yeah. Like guys, I mean, Sage Surratt is like Kelvin Harmon is what I could tell. Like, I mean, he just makes catches And
Yeah.
if you put him in one-on-one, that's going to happen, especially with our guys, But at the same time, like a lot of the balls I saw, at least in the FSU game, if you are on him playing good coverage, they're also potential picks for us too. Hartman doesn't seem to throw the ball the way that Newman does. That's a really good point about what your expectations are for this game. My expectation is I just want to see what the roadmap potentially is for us to get 2 more wins this year. And, if I can come out of this game and say, okay, I see where the path forward is and how it's going to line up with the non-Clemson teams left on the schedule. That's what I want. So I want to see us, when we do get into the red zone, that we can convert and get touchdowns. I want to see that with a tricky offense like this, if we can at least keep their run game in check, so that if we are going to play the I'm going to take one thing away from you game, we can at least do it. And the other thing too is, right, like we are coming out of a bye week, so it's going to be interesting to see, like, hey, these guys have had the whole time to plan. What's different? I don't think they're going to make it conservative, but Doran did say in his presser after one of the practices this week that they aren't going to necessarily open up the playbook for Leary. They just want to see him execute the playbook. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
yeah, he said something during that presser that stood out to me, and I'm not sure if anybody else picked up on it, but he said, we have 100 or 85, 100 plays in our playbook, and I was like, what? Like, that's insane. And I've heard other coaches talk about, and we've mentioned it too, simplifying things so that you don't like overwhelm guys. And maybe there's, and again, this is extremely outside view here, but maybe if you don't have 100 plays, maybe if you do 20 of them really, really well, then you'll execute better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of that is like derivatives off of plays. Sure. And right. They're also going to have plays that are specific for certain teams. Like, you're going to have something like that. But when he said that, I was kind of surprised, because I was like, I know what play isn't in there currently right now, and that's the jet sweep. But yeah, that was a really interesting comment, and I think they are. I hope they limit it somewhat, and then guys just go out there and do things, right? That's all you want to see. I want to see Jordan Houston, and if he's healthy, Bam Knight. I want to see a good, healthy dose of those guys too, right? You don't want this to be a game where Leary is throwing the ball 40 plus times. And
that's what we've been doing this year, which is really strange.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, well, let me put it like this. I guess if there is a quarterback on our roster that's throwing it 40 plus times, I guess Leary is the one I want to see. Because the ball, I don't care if it goes to the wrong team. It looks really pretty when it goes. And, I just, I'm really curious to see how they approach this, because there's a part of me that thinks that they will try to do ball control. If they can get any kind of ground game working, then you will see them try to protect the defense, right? And then that, does that game scenario, that game script, does it actually occur? And if we get into a shootout, are you going to go balls to the wall and just let Leary sling it? I feel like it's unlikely that we're going to see a balanced game, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to see, but if State wins this game, the 7:30 matchup with Clemson is going to be wild. I mean, we're going to be a 28-point dog. I'm just going to take a guess. But if State wins that game, and after showing a little bit of hope from the end of the BC game, I think that sets up well for us to be super excited for that game, and a really cool atmosphere. For some reason, we have the 7:30 primetime game. I don't know why, but
I hope
I think that's super interesting.
I hope if that happens, then Boo is handing out Old Toughies personally as people are walking in the stadium, and just getting everyone sauced to the that level of NC State fan rage that makes it really uncomfortable for teams to play there.
Yes,
that's a good point, man. I was telling my boss while we were in Puerto Rico, I was like, I'm not going to go to the Clemson game. That's going to be a bloodbath. And then I sat there and thought about it. I was like, or that game could be absolutely bonkers from a fan perspective if we win this game. So,
yeah,
because I think, Clemson, It seems like Clemson either has their A game or their D game right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh man,
their wide receiver group is scary good though, man. Oh man,
I know they're.
But we'll get into that.
Yeah,
we'll get into that.
Yeah. Now you got me thinking like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be good again.
Right? See, I'm telling you, like, temper everybody's optimism. But then there's that little light out there that says, man, if they win this game, it's going to be wild. No, I really want that wild night. It's been a while since we've had one of those. Mr. Rictus asks a question. I still don't really know what it means, so I'm going to ask it to you. Will 2018 forever be the answer to what is the worst case scenario for the state Wake Forest?
I think the worst case scenario would be ACC divisional title is on the line and we're at Wake Forest. You might as well just give the game, you might as well just turn it off. I remember after the 2018 game, I was like, you can fire Drink, you can fire Ledford, you can fire, blah, 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 blah. The one guy I gave a pass was Hux because I was like, you know what, whatever, freak pick play at the end of the game gets them in a chance, and then your dumbass offense can't convert a fourth down, and your wide receiver gets held, and yada yada yada. God, I can't just think about that game and get me fired up. Thanks, Rictus.
Yeah, but I think this year the tables are turned, right? Yeah. Wake is favored big time. They're ranked. We're coming in looking like dog shit, and it's a rare opportunity for us to step back and say, all right, we got nothing to lose. Let's go balls out, and I want to see them go balls out. I want to see Angry Dave. I want to see Salty Dave. Right? We've talked about this before, but Tamari Hines made a good point in some article somewhere that Wake Forest, this is almost their Super Bowl. They look up for this game, man. They get jacked for this game like State does the Carolina game. And we need him to be beating that drum all week. Like, they're going to come after you. They're going to come after you because it's really important game for them.
Yeah,
and we need it to be important for us.
Yeah, that Dave talked about that after the practice. I think Joe Jiggs asked him about it, and he was like, "It's our longest standing game that we've had, and I can't just beat the drum all week because I have to get them to practice and get ready for the game." He even mentioned that, like, kind of regarding UNC, right? They need to know it's important. And I'm sure everyone knows it's important because they need to win this game in order to make life easier to get into a bowl. But in the end, it's just about like execute. If Clausen is sitting there just beating the drum every day about NC State, maybe that's how we win, because then he is, just not focusing 100% on game plan. Yeah, I don't know. You remember how everyone used to always say like Butch Davis didn't prioritize the NC State game and that's why we beat them? I think we beat them because our teams were actually relatively equivalent for the most part, and we had a superstar NFL quarterback. That's why we beat them. And what we have right now is you've got an X factor in our quarterback, but I don't think Wake is like any more talented than us. It's just that they are settled and we are not. And so get settled over the bye week and surprise the hell out of them, because maybe they're going to be playing with their sphincters tight instead of us for once.
That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah, that's really what I'm hoping for. And Doran made reference to winning the state, and I think that's important. It's important for recruiting, which we'll get into here in a second. As our man William Dietrich asked, thoughts on the current football happenings. Team is struggling. Fan base is not overly excited. Commits flipping to that other school. Not saying panic mode, goes on, yada, yada, but, long-term impact. Give me your thoughts before I go on my rant here.
It wasn't a surprise that we're struggling this year. Anyone that looked at our depth chart before the season and looked at our schedule should have known that there was going to be some difficulty here. And I think our fan base really struggles with calibrating preseason and during the season to the results. For me, I'm not devastated by our performance, and I'm really not surprised. For commits flipping to UNC, I am really in kind of a I don't care mode with the guys who have gone there. I mentioned this to someone else the other day. It was like if Austin Blasky had flipped to someone else, I'd be upset. When you lose like your premier guy that you're gonna count on, that's a problem. When you lose guys that either are UNC fans or have family that are UNC fans, or they come from an area where a coach might be overly influenced by a Mack Brown type coach, you shouldn't be surprised. I mean, what you've got to do beforehand is, and I'm sure Dave does this, is you got to really understand, like, is there a risk to this flip happening, and is it worth us spending our resources here or not? And how do you maintain a replacement plan, right? So I think a lot of us were devastated last year when Jameis Griffin flipped to Georgia Tech, and then NC State went in and got Jordan Houston, and I think got the better end of that deal. Same opportunity here with Adorno leaving. Same opportunity with Gosnell leaving. Just if you need to trust our coaches when it comes to recruiting at this point. I know a lot of people hate to hear that, but these guys have clearly shown that they have an eye for talent. Guys that they identify and get on early often get a lot of scholarship offers because people know that NC State has been generating a lot of NFL talent at a school that typically hasn't done that on a consistent basis. So Crabtree commits last week at wide receiver and replaces Gosnell. I'm not too concerned. There's two guys that we are looking at to replace Adorno right now. That would be perfectly fine. You gotta just trust the process when it comes to recruiting. That's how I feel.
Yeah, they're both higher rated than Adorno as well. So yeah, I get the optics of it. That Max flipping your guys, but unless, like you said, unless it's Blasky, your highest rated offensive lineman, or any of these really high rated guys, I'm not really concerned about it. And then I think, and maybe that's just a message that James Henderson has beat into a lot of us that follow their recruiting coverage, that these guys are replaceable, man. There's a lot more good players than there are Power 5 spots.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And these guys aren't elite. The elite guys in the state this year, like Desmond Evans, I think he's the one that a lot of people look at and like, man, State never really had a chance with him. Well, State picked up four-star offensive line or defensive linemen last year. There's not a whole lot of playing time for him. The second point I'll make about him is, and just these guys in general, is how often does Clemson not go after these guys? Mm-hmm. That should tell you something right away, right? If he's really the top player in the state, why the hell didn't Clemson go after him? And they didn't.
That should be the red flag a lot of times.
Yes.
Right. And I'm not saying that all our guys are guys that Clemson goes after, but that is a great point. James talked about it with the Shrine Bowl, and to be a little equal opportunist, I'm going to also pump some cheer for the Wolfpacker on this, because they cover the Shrine Bowl each year too, and they always kind of say the same thing in a lot of their recruiting coverage, that once you get outside of the top 5-10 guys in the state, all these dudes look the same when their helmet's on.
Yeah.
And then it's about finding the guys that match your scheme the best, that are going to be good in your locker room, or maybe you find like a chip on the shoulder type guy that got overlooked. That's more important. I'll also just say this about flipping our commits to UNC. They don't really have space. I think they're actually over their allotment right now. So there's going to be some negative recruiting love. If Mack cuts your guy that was at UNC, if Mack's not thinking long term, if he's only thinking I'm going to try to hurt NC State, then go for it. I just really don't think Adorno or Gosnell are really game changers per se. And if they want to go get those guys, then go for it. It's better for us in the long run. You know what hurt UNC more? Us taking Peyton Wilson. That's the kind of flip that is a backbreaker.
Right. And I think that's where there's always one or two of those guys that I'd hate to lose. And McCollum the kid from Georgia this year, will be one of those guys because he's elite speed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a high chance he goes and plays baseball, doesn't even play college football.
That's the thing, right?
So, yeah, I'm not super concerned about it. And he's most likely not going to Carolina. So that's another one I'm not super concerned about. I would like to have him because he's really fast, and we apparently need really fast guys. But there's a lot of good players. The other kid they're looking at, the Devin Chandler, was a state Tennessee track champion. He's transferred to a high school in North Carolina and has been relatively under the radar. But it's a guy that they identified as they're interested in. And I think, there's plenty of opportunities for us to win other recruiting battles. And I am not concerned as much with Mack is back. That hype everybody is on. And yeah, I mean, I think that's it. How you combat that, you beat them, right? You get Salty Dave to show up and you kick their ass. And I think they're no better than we are at this point. I mean, they're 4-4 and they should have lost a couple of those games, the same way. They're not too far from
Salty
us.
Dave needs to go talk to Mr. Cutcliffe and some other teams that have been on their schedule and say, do not throw a pop pass to from the 2-yard line. Like I watched that play so many times. I have no idea. Unless Dave Cutcliffe has been throwing running back pop passes for years, I don't know why you do that there. I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing is, like, if you look at UNC's record this year, it's all close. It's mostly close wins, and it's just coaches doing the dumbest stuff at crunch time. I
mean, Manny Diaz, Carolina converted a 4th and 18 against Miami because Manny Diaz is blitzing 12 guys and he's got one safety back, and Carolina's just running 5 wides. You're like, what the hell are you doing? I've mentioned that a few times. I can't get over that.
That's the most anti-prevent defense you can do.
Right. Yeah, that's some Carolina luck, man. I'm telling you, that's the things that they've had the ball bounce their way a few times, but they're beatable. They're not fantastic. I don't buy into Mack is back. They're going to get their guys. They always do. All that stuff, man. It's just, it is what it is. There's plenty of football players out there. So,
and let me say that
I'm not on the downward trajectory. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about this, and I know it's going to come up, right? If Devin Leary looks really good in this game and plays well, or if we win and win and he doesn't play well, kind of thing. The coaches did not play him for one reason and one reason only. They did not think he was going to help them win the game at the time. So for all the Devin Leary truthers out there, please understand that Dave Doran does not play favorites. He just goes with what is in front of him. And Matt McKay was clearly the number one in camp from all sources on the subject. It wasn't even close. And Leary was a turnover machine in camp because he just wasn't seeing the defenses right. And, that is why the coaches gave him things to work on a weekly basis. And apparently he has been working on them and improving. So he probably will throw some picks, maybe this game or certainly against Clemson. But he was not on the bench because Doran has an axe to grind or wanted to promote McKay or Hockman or anything like that. Dave Doran wants to win every damn football game. You can guarantee it. And he didn't think Leary was ready. So I really hope that we see second half BC Leary and he's a playmaker and he opens up everything for this offense. I just think that this is literally the only, everything had to go the way it went in order for Leary to be playing now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One more football question from Tucker. We know the realistic goal is to get to 6-6 now. One of those wins clearly needs to be Georgia Tech. What's the most likely other win? That's Wake, Clemson, Carolina, Louisville, Georgia Tech.
Yeah. It's probably Louisville. It's at home. They're the worst opponent left on the schedule. I'd say it's probably Louisville, UNC. And then I guess you have to say Wake, Clemson, right? Did we get them all there?
Probably that order.
You got to win these two. You got to win the home games. I mean, I think that's just it. You got a young team. If you can't sneak something away here, it's got to be win the home games, because we could go down to Georgia Tech and biff up. Like it's just really hard to be a young team on the road. New environments just are really hard on people. Travel's hard on people. Trust me. I just was jet setting back and forth between Puerto Rico, and I was not 100%. And I am sure there's guys that, they get sore, they don't sleep well away from home, things like that. So Louisville's beatable. Louisville's defense is garbage. And I think what people should be looking for actually in this game is see how State compares against Wake Forest. And then go back and watch the Louisville game. If we play good defense and they aren't just scoring every other possession, and if we're moving the ball well on them, that should give you some hope against Louisville, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Louisville's much improved, and apparently they have a lot of speed on their team, which, but yeah, they're a winnable game. So that would be mine too. And going against my previous statement about being optimistic, we can win all these games on our schedule, right? If we get D- Clemson and A+ State, that game's a lot closer than we think. It's not likely, but it's possible. And it's the same thing, if we start to show some progress, if we start to the good State defense shows up, that Florida State game defense, and the good offense shows up, there's an opportunity there. I mean, there's still a lot out there to be played, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we just need to see from this team is if we can just get some interceptions or fumbles. I don't care how it comes. Every game outside of Clemson is winnable. Then that's the problem, right? We are not getting extra possessions, and we haven't been able to score on the standard possessions, right? So if Leary can score, if he really does open up the red zone offense to just being average and you get some extra possessions, that's a completely different second half of the season, in my opinion.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to note, that you mentioned Louisville, and it reminded me to bring this up, and I never do this, but a good friend of mine, he's been on this podcast before. He's a big Louisville fan. Got his own podcast. He's on the Louisville radio show now too. But Dave Skull and Biggest Biscuit, I've retweeted him and I've commented on him before. I found out this past week that he's been in a coma, medically induced coma for some illness that he's had, and he's come out of it. He's going to require a lot of therapy. So I'm going to tweet out a link later. It's a GoFundMe link if you guys are so inclined. Donate, man. I'll be honest, there's not a better person in this world and that's the reason I want to talk about it and support him. He's a Cardinal fan. He was a great host to us when we went to the Louisville game last year. He's been a good friend of mine. And I was kind of shook when I heard that. So I want to do what I can to support him. My wife and I will be donating to support his recovery, because that shit, it's not cheap. But I'm glad he's recovered. He's out of the coma and slowly recovering from what I've heard. So I wanted to put that out there. If anybody's obliged, just use whatever platform I have to help a good friend of mine.
Well, I know I would just move to donate, so I hope others are too.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll get back to a little bit more uplifting note. Some other stuff that I wanted to mention. Trey Turner is the greatest Wolfpack athlete of all time. Yes or no?
I mean, he's one. He is the best promotional athlete for us, I think, for sure. You don't see any of this whole pack of Badgers bullshit from this guy. Puts on the NC State helmet and gets us on full blast during champagne time. Dude, I didn't watch a single game of the World Series, and I just couldn't handle it. And I was so happy to wake up in the morning and see that he had won, and that's so great for him. And up here in Virginia, it's good to see a local team actually win something. Thanks, shout out to the Redskins.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and what I thought about when I saw him do this is that if you're a high school kid or you're a college athlete and you want to endear yourself to fans, like just beat the drum that they beat, right? Show them how much you care for their team. Obviously he does. Obviously Trea Turner is a big state guy, but I swear any athlete, if you're out there like representing NC State in a way like that just shows that you care about them as much as us fans do. I mean, the old adage is you'll never have to buy a drink in Raleigh again. I guarantee it, Trea Turner will never have to buy a drink in Raleigh again. And he just, he's endeared himself to a lot of people. And it's the same like Olim McNeil when he was being recruited and when he came and he was just, he was out there just talking about how much he loved NC State. And I think that really endears him to a lot of fans. And I think if you're an athlete or you have a kid or that you really want to win over the crowd, that's how you do it, man. You go out there and like be a homer almost. And I think that's awesome to see for Trea Turner. That was great.
Yeah. That's probably literally the best thing that could happen. Did you see that video of Elliott Avent losing his mind?
Yeah.
Right. And then someone said this was Elliott Avent getting held out of the of the locker room with Trea Turner.
Yeah. That was great. The other good piece to note, Bass Pack is back to dominating as they do. They won the Lake Norman fishing tournament, taking the first, second, and third spots. I so wish our football or basketball team could dominate somebody like that. It would be great.
You know what? I was just thinking, like, we've talked about like what we thought could be done better with like the Wolfpack Club and stuff like that. You guys need to set up some kind of donation scheme where if people give X, then the Bass Pack will take them out on a lake and give them a bass fishing kind of like expo.
Oh, dude, that would be so cool.
Right?
I always thought they should do that for football, for like get in the off season, have Coach Thunder like work you out for a couple.
I have literally said that. You don't even have to spend much time on it, Thunder. You just let us go work out with you for 30 minutes.
Yeah, like that would be so cool. I think that would be awesome. I think you'd get a lot of people who would pay for that experience and things like that. I mean, that's how you really do interesting stuff.
Well, did we ever get feedback from that Wolfpack Club rep about trying to get him on the podcast? Because I think that's something that I think a lot of fans, newer fans, younger fans, aren't really aware. The marketing seems to somehow miss a lot of people. And once you move after college, I don't know if they just can't seem to find us or what. But there's a good discussion to be had about the benefits of donating to the Wolfpack Club and ways to make it more incentivizing, I guess, for people to do so.
Yeah, we'll get some of those guys on. I know Seth was interested. I think he's university level giving. I'm not sure if he's Wolfpack Club. I need to figure that out. But regardless, I think having some of those guys on will be really interesting because I'd like to push that conversation forward. Right? We keep talking about how does NC State get to the next level. It takes more money.
Yep.
It takes better things, access to the LED lighting that Alabama implemented, all these cool things that just take more money, right? If you want, and I'd like to know how, like the plan and how they plan on, taking things to the next level, right? Boo's big thing is supposed to be fundraising. That's where his bread and butter. So how do you do that? And I think, Dustin. Shout out to Dustin, just had his kid, by the way. So make sure y'all congratulate Dustin having his first child. Dustin responded to my tweet about that, and it was just like IPTAY, right?
Yeah.
And so what Clemson does for those who don't know what IPTAY is I pay $10 a year. Now I think that's probably changed that number, but that's how they started with just give $10, man. Give $10 a year, and you're helping that, and they did that from have a big fan base, and I'd safe to say that our alumni base is bigger than theirs. So you can implement a similar program and get these folks that aren't donating to Wolfpack clubs, but they are fans and they would contribute. And I think that was a brilliant move, and we need to do something like that. So I'd love to know if State plans on doing that, how they plan on executing something like that. and just in general how the fundraising is to, what the plans are to make this thing better, because I think we all want to. I think everybody wants the state to go to the next level, and you get a lot of folks donating, I would think.
I think so for sure. I mean, that's kind of been my biggest complaint is just it's not really clear where the money's going. It's really convoluted the way the system is set up with like 20 different levels of giving. And I'm a fan of,
it sucks, man.
I really think they should have like 8 levels. I've kind of been really beating this drum every year when it comes up on the forums. If you make things simpler, I think people donate more often, but that's just me.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it is one of those things where we can get on it at a later podcast, but the difference between really good football programs and others is usually what they have behind the scenes and what they can afford to do. It's not what they do up front. It's not just coaching salary. It's a lot of the background support staff that people never notice.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll get into that more. Hopefully get Seth on, maybe one of his bosses and bosses, and work our way up and see what we can do, because I think that's a conversation that we'd like to have. And we probably should prepare more for that one than we do for these weekly podcasts. So I'm going to start that note document and start putting some thoughts in there, because that's an interesting conversation. With all that said, I think that's it. I'd love to know what everybody thinks. Give us your questions, thoughts, comments, all that jazz. Reminder, let's temper our expectations. But yeah, it's Wake Forest. Let's kick their ass.
Oh, I guarantee it. Go Pack.
It's going to be a fine day tomorrow. It's going to be a fine night tonight. It's going to be a fine